Welcome to episode 6 of my advanced post-processing workflow series. In the last episode, I was fine-tuning the tonality of the image as well as making some color adjustments. And in this episode, I want to talk about sharing images on the web and all the preparation and the steps that I take to make sure that my images look as good as they can on the web. So along with that, I'm going to be building an action to create web images, web-sized images from my full-size images. So let's get right into it. You can see I'm working from a copy of my master file. It doesn't have all of my layers, all my adjustment layers active. This is just for demonstration purposes. So the first thing, let me just introduce you to the action interface. So here is the action bar here, or panel. And you can see I have full of all kinds of different things. A lot of the TK actions from the TK action panel are housed in here, that all the actions it runs to do those amazing things. And then I have a bunch of compression actions that I've made for a bunch of different purposes. So I'm going to detach the panel from my launcher bar here, just so it's out and always available. And if you don't see this action bar, you can go up to your window menu up here and find actions, and you can load it from there if it's not visible already. So actions basically are, what you can do is you can create an action that records a bunch of different steps, repetitive steps that you do in processing usually, and you can play that back at any time on any image. So one of the best uses for actions for me are compression actions for the web that have like specific sizes and different variables that need to be set. So let me demonstrate how I build an action. So with the compression folder selected here, let's create a new action. You can do that by hitting this icon at the bottom of the panel, create new action. And you can see we can rename this. I'm going to name this demonstration, action. And you can see we can choose which set we want this action placed into. You can see you can also set function keys if you want, and I actually have several of the actions that I use most often set to function keys on my keyboard. You can also color code it if you want to help organize it. In this case, I'm not going to do any of that. I'm just going to keep it simple, and let's hit record. You can see as soon as we hit that record, it shows up that it's recording in the panel here. It shows a little record icon at the bottom. So now what Photoshop will do is it will record all of my actions that I do in Photoshop. And the whole purpose of this is to be able to replay these later on a different image to save a lot of time, because going through this manually, this is going to take about 5 or 10 minutes to go through all these different steps. But the beauty is once you've built an action, you just hit playback or hit the function key if you have it assigned to a function key, and it'll run that in a matter of a couple seconds. So it really is highly efficient and a great way to save time in Photoshop, especially on repetitive tasks. So in this case, we want to prepare this image for the web. So the first thing I want to do, this is just a demonstration version of this image, not the full master file. But the first thing I want to do is go up to layer, and let's flatten this image down. Yes, we'll discard this, don't need to see that again. So now we're starting with a flat image. It's a good first step. So the next step is I'm going to do some resizing. So the way I found that works best for resizing and sharpening for the web is to resize at double the size of your final output size that you want. So in this case, let's create a final size of 1200 pixels on the longest side. So this first resizing I'll do, I'm going to double that. So it's going to be 2400 pixels on the longest side. And there's a bunch of different ways of resizing an image. Usually I'll use image size under the image menu here. But in this case, because I'm building an action, I want to do it in a way that's more repeatable and will work with any image, whether it's horizontal or vertical or whatever. So instead, I'm going to go to the File menu, go down to Automate, and I'm going to choose Fit Image. Fit Image is a great tool for this purpose. What it does is it allows you to dial in constraining values. So in this case, again, since I want the final output size to be 1200, we're going to go with 2400 pixels, and you set it the same for both height and width. 2400, because what you're doing is you're setting a limiting value. So if it's a vertical, it'll limit the longest side, which is that vertical side, the height. And if it's horizontal, like this image, it's going to constrain the longest side, which is the width. You can also check this don't enlarge if you want, in case you're using some smaller files and you don't want them to be enlarged just to then again reduce the size. So I'll have that checked, and I'm going to hit OK. So we've done our first resizing. Now let's zoom into 100%. So the way I like to do this, and this is just the way that I've found that works best for preparing images for the web, is I'll resize and then I'll sharpen in between. And the idea is I want to over sharpen it just a little bit. So I'm going to go up to the Filter menu, go down to Sharpen, Smart Sharpen. And these are pretty decent starting values. You can see I have my amount and my radius here, and you can adjust these. These are just starting points that I think are effective. So I'm going to go a little bit more. Maybe let's go 200 for our amount, or right around there. And I'm going to go with 0.8 for my radius. And that's giving me a nice sharpening value here. And it's just on the edge of being maybe a little bit too sharp, but it looks good. So I'm going to hit OK. And then we're going to resize it again. So I'm going to go back to the File menu, go to Automate, Fit Image, and then we'll set our final size, 1200 pixels. And hit OK. And the reason that 1200 pixels looks so small is I'm working on a 4K monitor, so at that resolution it looks a little bit smaller, but this is a good web size, and this is probably the most common web size that I share now. So if we look over here at our Actions panel, you can see that it's recorded those 4 steps, and that looks good. So the next several steps of this action are going to be dedicated to loading a watermark file or a signature file to load as a watermark. So I'm going to show you how to do that. It's a little bit tricky, so let's get into it. So with this still recording, you see that it still says it's recording here in the Actions panel. We can go up to File, Open, and I'm going to find my logo file. You can also just create your own just by using the text tool in Photoshop or whatever. I just happen to have a signature file. So I'm going to hit Open. And you can see this has opened the logo file. It's hard to see because it's on that checkered background. But what I want to do is select all. So I just use Command A or Control A on a PC. Choose Select All, and then I want to copy. So Command or Control C. And then I want to close this file out. So I want to hit Command W or Close Window. And then I want to hit Paste. So Command V, Control V, depending on whether you're Mac or PC. And yes, you might get this profile mismatch if there are different color spaces. This is fine, no big deal. Just hit OK. And there you can see we have our signature logo loaded up on top of the image. So now what we want to do is I want to align this logo file down into the lower right portion of this image. And again, I want this to be repeatable, so it does matter how you do this. So I want to do this in a way that's repeatable, whether it's a horizontal, vertical, or any type of file. So the way I can do that is I'm going to select the background layer here in the layers palette, and I want to select all. So again, Command A or Control A on a PC. And what that does is it creates a selection around the entire image. That's perfect. So what we can do is then click back onto our logo layer here, and I can head up to the layer menu, and we can align this layer to the edge of this selection. So what I want is the bottom right. So I'm going to do bottom edge first, then I'll go back to layer, align, and then I'll choose right edge. So now I can deselect our selection here, and it's looking a little bit big right now. So let's resize that logo file first, and then we'll position it into its final position. This is just a starting position. I don't want it all the way to the edge, but again, since we want this repeatable, I just set it to those edges as a good starting point. So I'm going to go up into Edit, Transform, Scale, and under the height and width value up here, I'm just going to set this to 60%. That looks pretty good. You can see I have these linked, so it stays at 60% for both the height and width. That's perfect. I'll hit return, and then I'll hit return again, and that will set those values. So the next step is I want to lower the opacity. I don't want that signature logo at full opacity. I want to make it more of a watermark. So you can play around. Here's like 50%. That's pretty good. Maybe I'll go with like 60%. That seems pretty good. And I'll hit return to set that value. And it looks good. So now we have our logo watermark in position. And that should be repeatable. And we'll test that a little bit later. So now our image is ready to export for the web. We've resized it, sharpened it, done our watermark, and prepared this image for the web. So the next step is to head up into the file menu here, go to export, and we're going to use the Save for Web Legacy option here. And you can see I have this set as my JPEG presets. So I want this to be in the JPEG file format, and I set my quality to 90%. That way it stays at a reasonable size. You can see the size down here in the lower left corner. It's a pretty reasonable size, but it retains really good image quality at 90%. It doesn't compress it too much. One of the other important things to note here is that I have this box checked the convert to sRGB. sRGB is the web color space, and if I hadn't have done this, I would have had to have done that step somewhere along building the action. But luckily this tool, this Save for Web tool, you can just do it right here. So I always check this convert to sRGB. We already did our resizing, so we don't have to resize this. And the next step, we just hit save. And what I want to do now is create a folder. So if I run this action in the future, it always dumps these images that are prepared for the web into a specific folder. So I'm going to hit new folder. I'm going to call it demo 1200p. px. And I'll hit create. And now when I hit save, it's going to drop this file into that folder. And it also, because we did it as an action, it tells Photoshop to put any image that I run this action on into that folder. So that's another really handy bit about running these actions or using actions. So there's one other really important step that we need to do before we can stop recording this action. So we need to close this out without saving. So what I want to do, go up to the File menu, and we want to close this image out. You can see the keyboard shortcut for this is Command W or Control W on a PC. And that's what we want to do. We want to close this image, and this is the important part. You want to hit Don't Save, because we don't want to save over our original file after we just compressed it down to web size. So let's hit Don't Save. And I always do that and build that into the action again, just to make sure that I don't accidentally save over my original file. So now I can hit Stop here in the action panel. So if I hit stop, you can see we've got all of these different steps that we recorded, and now that we hit stop, it'll stop recording our actions, and now we can use this action. So let me demonstrate how it works to use an action that you build. So you can see I have a vertical image here. So I want to test it on and make sure it works for a vertical image as well. So let's select that action, the demonstration action here, and let's hit play and see what happens. So if I hit play, it's going to run all those different actions. It's going to, I'm just going to hit don't show this again so it won't show up next time. That's just for the profile mismatch, no big deal. And it did all of that in a matter of like a second. So it did that whole thing that just took me 10 minutes to explain, it did in less than 2 seconds. So now let's make sure that it did what I wanted it to do. So let's go into web images. Let's find our demo 1200, and let's find that image. Yes, you can see the dimensions are correct, and it put the logo file down in the lower corner. So yes, if we compare these, you can see this was the horizontal image, this was the vertical image, and it works for both. So let's go back to Photoshop and talk about a couple other important things that have to do with actions. So a couple handy things that go along with actions are you can turn off steps along the way if you want. So in this case, let me just turn off the very last step, the close step. Actually, I'll even turn off the export step as well. So you can turn off this step, and when you run the action, it will stop. It'll only go to this step. That comes in handy for a lot of different instances. And another thing you can do within this action panel is you can set stopping points if you want to be able to customize the values that are being applied. So for instance, let's do that for the fit image, the smart sharpen, and then the second fit image. So again, the reason I did the 2 fit images is so I could do the sharpening in between. Just gives a really pleasing look for web images. So now let's run this action again, and it will stop at these points that I've told to stop. You can see you can use this column for those stopping points, and again, you have these check marks so you can turn on and off steps within this action if we want. So let's hit play and see what happens. You can see it gets to that fit image step, and then it loads the fit image dialog box here. So if you want to type in different values, let's say you want to end up with an image that's 1500 pixels on either side. You can set this first fit image to 3000 instead. So I'm just going to leave it the same, but you can see you can edit these values because I set this stopping point here. So I'll hit OK, and as soon as I hit OK, it just moves on to the next step. It tries to run the rest of the action. But it just got to the next point, the Smart Sharpen step in the action. So this is one that I always have set to stop at in these web compression actions, because I tend to like to sharpen different amounts based on individual images. So again, in this case, this was set for this image, but maybe this is a mountain scene that has higher detail, and maybe I would change these values to sharpen a little bit more to reflect the added detail. So that's one spot in my actions for compression that I always have set to stop at. So this looks good. I'm going to hit OK. And again, now it's stopping at this third stopping point that I set. And again, if we were doing wanted a different output size, maybe 1040 or 800, whatever size you want for the web, you can dial it in here and customize it. And as soon as I hit OK, it'll just run the rest of these actions, these next 10 steps or whatever. So I'm going to hit OK, and you can see, boom, it just ran all those 10 steps in like a blink of an eye. Let me zoom in to 100% again. And there we go. It's run all those actions. It did all the alignment. It opened that logo file, aligned it for me. Everything looks great, just the way we'd want. So it's perfect. But you can see using actions is incredibly efficient. It's just, again, it took like that whole 10-minute process, and it takes like a single second, especially if you don't have any stopping points set and everything selected here, all these steps selected. It runs this really quickly, again, in a blink of an eye, very efficient. So any repetitive tasks that I have in Photoshop, I tend to build actions for. And that, again, is the beauty of the TK action panel. Tony Kuiper has actually built all these different actions and created buttons to use all these different complicated actions for. But, again, there's still things that I like to do and build my own actions for certain repetitive tasks that are specific to my workflow. So you can see I have a bunch of different actions here in various action folders or sets. Yeah, so there you go. That's how I build a compression action for preparing an image for the web. And this is the type of thing that I'll do, when I want to send or share an image either on Facebook or Instagram or any photo site. I'm going to run the same type of action, and depending on the site, I might do it a slightly different size or different sharpening amounts. So you can create specific you can make specific actions for each individual use that you might have or place that you're going to share it. So I hope you enjoyed this episode and learned something about how efficient the use of actions can be. It's something that I use a lot, and it's something that makes my workflow in Photoshop much more efficient. And I think in the next episode, I'll start going through how I prepare images for print, which is a whole nother set of things that I'll do in preparation. So thank you for watching. Like and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this, and I'll see you in the next one.